The story begins in 1981 in San Francisco, where Chris Gardner lives with his wife, Linda, and their 5-year-old son. Christopher Jr. Chris is an ambitious, self-motivated man who dreams of providing a better life for his family. At the time, he has pinned his hopes on a business venture that he believes will secure their future, selling portable bone density scanners to hospitals and private medical practitioners. The bone density scanner is a significant investment for Chris. It represents all his savings, and he believes in its potential to revolutionize diagnostic imaging. However, the device is an expensive luxury that many hospitals do not deem essential, especially when X-ray machines suffice for most medical purposes. As Chris roams the city with the scanner in hand, visiting clinics and doctors' offices, rejection after rejection begins to erode his optimism. Despite his efforts, Chris finds himself unable to sell enough scanners to cover his family's basic needs. Each day is a battle to make ends meet. Rent is overdue, bills pile up, and creditors constantly call. The apartment they live in is modest, and while Chris tries to maintain a sense of normalcy for his son, the tension between him and Linda grows. Linda works long hours as a laundromat attendant, a job that barely supplements Chris's meager earnings. She is visibly exhausted and frustrated, feeling trapped in a life of unending struggle. Linda's patience is wearing thin as she watches Chris chase what she believes to be an unrealistic dream. One evening, their argument escalates. "Chris, we can't keep living like this," Linda yells, slamming her bag on the table. "When are you going to wake up and realize that these scanners aren't going to save us?" Chris, though tired, responds calmly but firmly. "Linda, I'm doing the best I can. I know this will work. It just takes time." "Time? We don't have time, Chris. The rent is late again, and the landlord is threatening to evict us. I can't keep working double shifts while you gamble everything on this." Chris looks at his son, who is playing with a toy truck in the corner of the room, blissfully unaware of the tension. He feels the weight of his responsibilities crushing him, but refuses to give up. "I'm doing this for us, for him," he says, nodding toward Christopher Jr. That night, Chris stays awake, poring over sales strategies and making a list of doctors to call the next day. He is determined to prove Linda wrong and make the scanners a success. The following day, Chris takes his scanner and heads to a series of meetings. One doctor listens politely but declines to buy, saying, "It's a good device, Mr. Gardner, but it's too expensive. We just don't need it." Another doctor dismisses him outright. As rejection after rejection piles up, Chris's frustration grows. He begins to doubt himself, but quickly shakes off the negative thoughts. His resolve hardens. "I'll make this work," he tells himself. On his way home, Chris sees a man in a sleek business suit stepping out of a shiny red Ferrari. Intrigued, Chris approaches him. "Excuse me," he says, "what do you do? And how do you do it?" The man smiles and replies, "I'm a stockbroker." Chris is struck by the idea. A stockbroker? He begins to imagine himself in a similar role, earning enough to provide his family with the life they deserve. The man's confident demeanor and apparent success ignite a spark in Chris. That evening, Chris shares his revelation with Linda. "I met a guy today, Linda. He's a stockbroker. He makes good money, and I think I can do it too." Linda scoffs, her weariness evident. "Another dream, Chris? We can't afford your dreams right now. We need real solutions." But Chris is undeterred. He begins to research what it takes to become a stockbroker. He learns about a competitive internship program at Dean Witter Reynolds that could lead to a job. There's just one problem. The internship is unpaid, and they're already struggling to stay afloat. As Chris grapples with this new possibility, his relationship with Linda continues to deteriorate. She feels abandoned in their shared struggle, while Chris feels unsupported in his pursuit of a better future. The cracks in their marriage grow deeper, setting the stage for a turning point that will challenge Chris in ways he never anticipated. For now, Chris holds on to the hope that his dreams of success will one day become a reality. With the weight of his family's survival on his shoulders, he resolves to find a way, no matter the cost. The growing strain in Chris and Linda's relationship reaches a breaking point. Each day feels like a battle, with financial stress driving them further apart. Chris is determined to hold on to hope, but Linda, exhausted from years of struggle, sees no light at the end of the tunnel. One evening, Chris comes home after another long day of failed sales pitches. He places the unsold bone density scanner in the corner of the room, its mere presence a reminder of his perceived failures. Linda, still in her laundromat uniform, sits at the table, her head in her hands. The tension in the air is palpable. "Chris," Linda starts, her voice trembling, "I can't do this anymore." Chris freezes, knowing exactly what's coming. He sets down his bag and turns to her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done," Linda replies, tears streaming down her face. "I can't keep living like this. I'm working myself to the bone, and it's never enough. You're chasing a dream that's tearing this family apart." Chris's voice is calm but firm. "Linda, I'm doing this for us. For Christopher. I just need more time." "Time?" Linda snaps, her frustration boiling over. "We're out of time, Chris. The landlord gave us another eviction notice today. How much longer are we supposed to wait while you keep betting everything on those scanners?" Their argument grows heated, but Chris refuses to let it escalate in front of their son. Christopher Jr., sitting on the floor with his toys, looks up at his parents with wide, innocent eyes. Chris kneels down to him and says, "Hey buddy, why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" Once Christopher Jr. is out of earshot, Linda drops the bombshell. "I'm leaving, Chris. I've already found a place to stay in New York. I'm taking Christopher with me." Chris's heart sinks. "You can't do that," he says, his voice cracking. "He's my son too. I'll take care of him." Linda shakes her head. "How, Chris? You can barely take care of yourself. You don't even have a steady income. I'm his mother. I can give him a better life." But Chris refuses to back down. "I'll figure it out," he says firmly. "I'll take care of him. I'll do whatever it takes." After hours of emotional discussion, Linda reluctantly agrees to let Christopher stay with Chris, but she leaves the next morning, her suitcase in hand. Christopher Jr., unaware of the gravity of the situation, hugs his mother goodbye and waves as she walks out the door. Chris watches her leave, a mix of guilt, sadness, and determination etched on his face. With Linda gone, Chris now shoulders the full responsibility of raising Christopher Jr. He knows the stakes are higher than ever, and he resolves to make the most of the opportunity he learned about, the unpaid internship at Dean Witter Reynolds. Chris begins the grueling process of applying for the internship, which involve a series of challenging interviews. Despite his lack of formal education or professional experience, he approaches each interview with confidence, using his wit and determination to stand out. One memorable moment occurs during an interview with Jay Twistle, one of the firm's managers. Chris arrives late, wearing paint-stained clothes after helping a friend move furniture earlier in the day. Embarrassed but undeterred, Chris explains his situation with honesty and charm. "I may not look the part right now," Chris says, "but I promise you, I'll work harder than anyone else here if you give me the chance." Jay, impressed by Chris's sincerity and determination, decides to give him a shot. Chris is offered a spot in the highly competitive internship program, but there's a catch. It's unpaid, and only one intern out of the entire program will be offered a permanent position at the end. As Chris begins the internship, he quickly realizes the immense challenge ahead. His days are long and demanding, filled with cold calls, studying financial markets, and building relationships with potential clients. The pressure to perform is immense, especially knowing that his financial situation is precarious. Meanwhile, his home life is far from easy. Chris and Christopher Jr. are evicted from their apartment after failing to pay rent. With nowhere to go, Chris manages to find temporary shelter at a local motel, using what little money he has left to pay for a room. Despite these challenges, Chris remains focused on his goal. He begins each day with unwavering determination, waking up early to prepare for work and spending late nights studying to gain an edge over his peers. His love for his son becomes his greatest motivator. One day, Chris takes Christopher Jr. to a basketball court to play. As they shoot hoops, Christopher says, "Dad, I want to be a professional basketball player when I grow up." Chris, seeing the spark of ambition in his son, responds thoughtfully, You know, buddy, if you work hard and stay focused, you can do anything you set your mind to. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something, not even me. The moment becomes a turning point for Chris. He realizes that his actions will shape Christopher's future and that he must lead by example, no matter how tough things get. As the chapter closes, Chris sits alone in their tiny motel room after putting Christopher to bed. He stares at his unpaid bills and the eviction notice still crumpled in his bag. Despite everything, a glimmer of hope remains in his eyes. He whispers to himself, "I'll make it. I have to." Chris Gardner's life as an unpaid intern at Dean Witter Reynolds begins with both hope and a daunting reality. While the internship offers him a chance to prove himself and build a future, it comes with no salary, which adds to the financial strain he already faces. Chris's days are now a juggling act, managing his duties at the firm, raising Christopher Jr., and finding ways to keep them sheltered and fed. The firm's high-energy environment is unlike anything Chris has experienced before. The office is bustling with stockbrokers making phone calls, sealing deals, and analyzing market trends. The competition is fierce, with dozens of interns vying for the coveted single position at the end of the program. Chris knows he must stand out, not just with his performance, but with his ability to navigate his challenging circumstances. Chris starts each day early, waking Christopher Jr. and getting him ready for daycare before rushing to the office. He walks or takes the bus to save money, often skipping breakfast because he can't afford it. By the time he arrives at Dean Witter Reynolds, he's already physically exhausted but mentally prepared for the intense day ahead. The internship demands that he make hundreds of cold calls to potential clients. Chris develops a strategy to maximize his efficiency. He skips dialing the numbers 1 and 0 to save time. Every second counts, as his success depends on how many clients he can bring in for the firm. His charm, wit, and determination quickly set him apart. While other interns make calls mechanically, Chris puts effort into building genuine connections. He listens carefully to clients' needs and pitches tailored solutions, always keeping a professional tone despite his personal struggles. One day, a senior stockbroker, observing Chris's persistence, pulls him aside. "You're doing good work, Gardner," the broker says. "But remember, it's not just about numbers. It's about relationships. People want to do business with someone they trust." Chris takes this advice to heart, focusing on building rapport with clients rather than rushing through calls. As the days turn into weeks, Chris's financial situation worsens. The rent at the motel becomes unaffordable, and he and Christopher are forced to leave. With no permanent place to stay, Chris begins to rely on homeless shelters and occasionally spends nights in train stations or public restrooms. One particularly harrowing night, Chris and Christopher arrive at the BART station, their belongings stuffed into a few plastic bags. Christopher, clutching his favorite toy, looks up at his father with tired eyes. "Where are we going, Dad?" he asks. Chris kneels down, forcing a smile despite the ache in his heart. "We're going on an adventure, buddy. Just for tonight." He leads his son into the restroom, locking the door behind them. Using paper towels as a makeshift pillow, Chris holds Christopher close as they lie on the cold tile floor. Tears well up in Chris's eyes, but he refuses to let his son see him break. Despite these challenges, Chris remains committed to his internship. His determination catches the attention of his supervisor, Jay Twistle, who begins to see Chris as a serious contender for the position. One day, Jay invites Chris to join him in meeting a high-profile client. Chris sees this as a golden opportunity to prove his value. During the meeting, he observes Jay's approach, how he listens attentively, speaks confidently, and handles objections with ease. When the client asks a technical question, Chris steps in with a thoughtful answer, impressing both the client and Jay. After the meeting, Jay commends Chris. "You've got potential, Gardner. Keep this up, and you might just have a shot." Encouraged by this, Chris doubles down on his efforts. He stays late at the office, poring over financial reports and market trends, determined to gain an edge over his competitors. Throughout this ordeal, Christopher Jr. remains a beacon of hope for Chris. Despite the instability of their lives, Christopher's innocence and resilience inspire Chris to keep going. One afternoon, Chris picks up Christopher from daycare, only to find him sitting alone while other children are playing with their parents. Christopher runs to his father, his face lighting up with a smile. "Dad, guess what? I drew a picture of us today," he says, holding up a crayon drawing. Chris takes the picture and sees two stick figures holding hands, surrounded by a big red heart. He kneels down and hugs Christopher tightly. "I love it, buddy. You're the best artist I know." These moments remind Chris of why he's fighting so hard. No matter how difficult life gets, his love for his son gives him the strength to persevere. As the chapter draws to a close, Chris finally lands a client, a small but significant victory that boosts his confidence. The client, impressed by Chris's tenacity and professionalism, agrees to open an account. Chris returns to the office with a newfound sense of hope. While he knows there's still a long road ahead, this small success reinforces his belief that he's on the right path. Later that night, as Christopher sleeps beside him in a crowded homeless shelter, Chris looks up at the ceiling and whispers, "We're gonna make it, buddy. I promise." Chris Gardner's life continues as a precarious balancing act. By now, his daily routine is nothing short of a marathon, beginning before sunrise and often stretching into the late hours of the night. Between his unpaid internship at Dean Witter Reynolds, parenting Christopher Jr., and battling homelessness, Chris is being tested like never before. Despite the odds stacked against him, his resolve remains unshaken, driven by his love for his son and his dream of providing a better life. The competition among the interns at Dean Witter is intense. Out of the 20 hopefuls, only one will be offered a permanent position. The stakes are higher for Chris, who has no financial cushion or fallback plan. Every day in the office feels like a high-stakes race, with his competitors treating each other as rivals. Chris, however, refuses to get caught up in the office politics. Instead, he focuses entirely on improving his skills and productivity. He learns to navigate the world of finance with remarkable speed, absorbing everything he can about stocks, portfolios, and client relationships. But the pressure begins to take a toll on Chris physically and emotionally. He loses weight from skipping meals, and the constant stress is etched into his face. Despite this, he shows up to work every day wearing the same suit and carrying the same old briefcase. One of the senior brokers, noticing Chris's determination, asks him, "How do you keep going? You never seem to quit." Chris replies with a faint smile, "Because quitting isn't an option. Not for me." As Chris juggles his internship, his financial situation deteriorates further. One morning, Chris rushes to the daycare to drop off Christopher before heading to the office. He's running late, and when he arrives, the daycare director stops him. "Mr. Gardner," she says with a concerned look, "your payment is overdue. If you can't pay by the end of the week, we'll have to ask you to make other arrangements." Chris nods, his heart sinking. "I understand. I'll figure it out." The weight of this ultimatum presses heavily on him throughout the day. He knows that losing daycare for Christopher would make it nearly impossible to continue the internship. That evening, Chris desperately searches for ways to scrape together the money. He tries to sell another bone density scanner, but after hours of pitching to doctors and medical offices, he returns home empty-handed. With no other options, Chris makes a painful decision. He pawns the last of his belongings, including his prized watch, to make enough money to pay the daycare fees. Despite the mounting challenges, Chris begins to gain traction at work. His strategy of building genuine relationships with clients starts to pay off, and he secures a few small accounts. While these victories are modest, they boost his confidence and show the senior brokers that he's a serious contender. One day, Chris lands a meeting with a wealthy potential client, a feat that even some of the senior brokers struggle to achieve. The client, a no-nonsense businessman, is initially skeptical of Chris. "You're new to this game," the client says. "What makes you think I should trust you with my money?" Chris takes a deep breath and responds with conviction. "Because I'll work harder than anyone else to make sure your investments succeed. I understand the value of every dollar because I've fought for every dollar I have, and I won't take your trust lightly." The client, impressed by Chris's honesty and determination, agrees to give him a chance. While Chris is making strides at work, his personal life remains in turmoil. The homeless shelter where he and Christopher have been staying becomes overcrowded, and they're forced to leave. For several nights, Chris and his son sleep in public places, including subway trains and parks. One particularly difficult night, they find themselves at a bus stop in the pouring rain. Chris uses his coat to shield Christopher from the cold, trying to keep him warm. "Dad," Christopher whispers, "why don't we have a house like other people?" Chris struggles to find the words, his voice breaking as he replies, "Because sometimes life is really hard, buddy. But I promise you, things are going to get better. We just have to keep going." Chris's efforts at work finally catch the attention of the firm's partners. One of them, impressed by Chris's ability to land clients despite his lack of experience, invites him to a high-profile networking event. At the event, Chris is surrounded by some of the most successful people in the industry. He knows this is a rare opportunity to make connections and prove himself. He approaches the conversations with confidence, sharing his story and vision for the future. By the end of the night, Chris has made a strong impression on several key players in the financial world. As the chapter nears its end, Chris faces a defining moment. One of his colleagues informs him that a major client is considering withdrawing their account. Losing this client could jeopardize Chris's standing in the internship program. Determined not to let this happen, Chris spends hours preparing for a meeting with the client. He researches their portfolio, anticipates their concerns, and develops a detailed plan to address them. At the meeting, Chris delivers a passionate presentation, demonstrating his knowledge and commitment. The client, impressed by Chris's effort, decides to stay with the firm. This victory is a turning point for Chris. It proves to himself and others that he has what it takes to succeed, even under the most challenging circumstances. Chris Gardner's relentless pursuit of a better life for himself and his son continues, but the challenges seem to intensify as his internship at Dean Witter Reynolds progresses. Balancing the demands of a highly competitive internship with the struggles of homelessness begins to take a toll on both his physical and emotional well-being. Despite his unwavering determination, Chris finds himself pushed to the very edge, fighting to hold on to hope and dignity amidst the chaos. By now, Chris has become a recognizable figure at Dean Witter Reynolds, not because of his success, but because of his unusual circumstances. His threadbare suit and old briefcase stand out in the polished corporate environment. Some colleagues view him with pity, while others question whether he belongs there. Chris, however, refuses to let anyone's judgment deter him. He arrives early and stays late, often being the last in turn to leave the office. He has learned the ins and outs of cold calling and has begun to develop a modest client base. Yet, the pressure to outperform his peers is immense. With only one permanent position available, every interaction feels like a test. One particularly tough day, Chris learns that one of his potential clients has decided to go with another broker. The rejection stings, but Chris doesn't let it show. He forces a smile, picks up the phone, and dials another number. Through all this, Christopher Jr. remains Chris's source of strength. The young boy, though too young to fully understand their circumstances, displays remarkable resilience. He adapts to life in shelters and crowded daycares with a level of maturity beyond his years. One evening, after a long day at the office, Chris picks up Christopher from daycare. As they walk to the shelter, Christopher looks up at his father and asks, "Dad, are we happy?" The question catches Chris off guard. He pauses, kneeling down to meet his son's gaze. "Happiness isn't just about what we have, buddy. It's about what we're working towards. And I promise you, we're going to get there." Christopher nods, seemingly satisfied with the answer. He takes his father's hand, and together they continue their journey. As winter approaches, the streets of San Francisco grow colder, and finding a place to stay becomes increasingly difficult. The shelters are overcrowded, and Chris and Christopher often have to wait in long lines for a chance to secure a bed. One night, after being turned away from a shelter, Chris and Christopher are forced to sleep outside. They find a bench near a park and huddle together for warmth. Chris uses his jacket to cover his son, shielding him from the chilly night air. As Christopher drifts off to sleep, Chris looks up at the starry sky, tears streaming down his face. He feels the weight of his failures pressing down on him, but resolves not to let despair take over. "Just keep going," he whispers to himself. "One step at a time." At work, Chris's efforts finally start to pay off. He secures a meeting with Walter Ribbon, a high-net-worth client who could significantly boost his standing in the internship program. Chris knows this is a make-or-break opportunity, so he meticulously prepares for the meeting, researching Ribbon's investment history and financial goals. On the day of the meeting, Chris borrows a clean shirt and tie from a local charity to present himself as professionally as possible. He arrives at Ribbon's office with a confident yet humble demeanor. During the meeting, Ribbon expresses skepticism about working with an intern. Chris, however, responds with honesty and passion. "I may not have the same experience as others, but I have something they don't: a hunger to succeed and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. Give me a chance, and I'll prove it to you." Ribbon, impressed by Chris's authenticity, agrees to open a small account. For Chris, this victory is a turning point. It validates his efforts and gives him the confidence to keep pushing forward. Despite this glimmer of hope, Chris's personal struggles remain ever present. His grueling schedule leaves little time for rest, and he begins to feel the physical effects of exhaustion. His health deteriorates, and he frequently skips meals to ensure Christopher has enough to eat. One evening, after a particularly long day, Chris collapses on a bench outside the shelter. A kind passerby notices him and offers him a sandwich and a bottle of water. "Thank you," Chris says, his voice barely audible. The stranger smiles. "You look like you're going through a lot. Just remember, tough times don't last forever." These words resonate deeply with Chris, reigniting his determination to keep moving forward. As the chapter nears its end, Chris makes a promise to himself and to his son. He takes Christopher to a small playground near the shelter, watching as the boy plays with unbridled joy. "Dad, look, I can swing so high," Christopher calls out, laughing. Chris smiles, feeling a rare moment of peace. He knows that everything he's enduring is for this, seeing his son happy and carefree. That night, as they settle into the shelter, Chris whispers to his sleeping son, "I promise you, Christopher, I won't let us stay here forever. I'll give you the life you deserve." By the end of this chapter, Chris's resolve is stronger than ever. He knows the road ahead will be difficult, but he also knows that every small victory brings him closer to his goal. As he lies awake in the dimly lit shelter, surrounded by strangers and uncertainty, Chris closes his eyes and visualizes a better future: a home, stability, and a sense of security for him and his son. "I can do this," he tells himself. "We're going to make it." As Chris Gardner's journey continues, his resolve begins to bear fruit. However, his challenges remain daunting, testing his patience, endurance, and belief in himself. This chapter is a turning point where small victories inspire greater efforts, and Chris begins to glimpse the possibility of achieving his dreams. Chris has become a familiar face at Dean Witter Reynolds, not just for his determined work ethic, but also for his ability to connect with potential clients. By now, he has learned to leverage every minute of his day to maximum effect. He no longer sees lunch breaks as rest periods. Instead, he uses that time to make cold calls and schedule meetings. One afternoon, Chris secures a meeting with a major client, one whose portfolio could significantly boost his performance metrics. Despite feeling underprepared due to lack of resources and time, Chris steps into the meeting with confidence. The client, a middle-aged man named Mr. Thompson, initially appears skeptical. He listens to Chris's pitch with a guarded expression. "Why should I trust you with my money?" Mr. Thompson asks bluntly. Chris takes a deep breath and responds with conviction. "Because I know what it means to work for something and not take it for granted. I'll put in the effort to ensure your trust is well placed. Your success will be my success." The sincerity in Chris's voice seems to strike a chord with Mr. Thompson. After a moment's pause, he says, "All right, let's see what you can do." This breakthrough provides Chris with a newfound sense of hope and validation. He knows he has to keep building on this momentum. With this small victory, Chris doubles down on his efforts. He begins to streamline his cold calling process, focusing on quality over quantity. He learns to identify potential clients who are more likely to invest, making his efforts more effective. One evening, Chris decides to approach a senior broker at Dean Witter for advice. Though hesitant at first, the broker recognizes Chris's potential and offers some valuable tips. Gardner, it's not just about selling, the broker says. It's about solving problems. Show them how you can make their lives easier. This advice resonates with Chris. He starts tailoring his pitches to address specific client needs, and it begins to pay off. Slowly but surely, his client list grows. Throughout this period, Christopher Jr. continues to be Chris's source of strength and inspiration. The young boy's optimism and resilience remind Chris of why he's fighting so hard. One evening, as they walk back to the shelter, Christopher asks, "Dad, are we going to have a house soon?" Chris kneels down and looks his son in the eye. "Yes, buddy, we're going to have a house, and it's going to be a great one. Just a little more time, okay?" Christopher nods, smiling. "Okay, Dad, I believe you." These moments fuel Chris's determination, even as the challenges of their situation weigh heavily on him. Despite his growing success at work, Chris's personal life remains precarious. One night, after a long day at the office, Chris and Christopher arrive at the shelter only to find the doors locked. The shelter has reached full capacity. With nowhere else to go, Chris decides to take his son to a train station. They find an empty restroom and lock the door behind them. Using his coat as a makeshift bed, Chris lays Christopher down and sings softly to help him sleep. As Chris sits on the cold floor, tears stream down his face. The weight of their situation feels unbearable, but he refuses to give in to despair. He knows he has to keep moving forward. The next morning, Chris wakes up before dawn and carries Christopher to the daycare before heading to the office. Despite the sleepless night, he arrives at work with his usual determination. Chris's perseverance begins to catch the attention of his supervisors at Dean Witter. One of the senior brokers, impressed by Chris's recent successes, pulls him aside. "Gardner, I've been watching you," the broker says. "You've got potential. Keep this up, and you'll go far." This recognition bolsters Chris's confidence, but he knows he can't let it distract him. He remains focused on his goal, securing the top position at the end of the internship. During this time, Chris reconnects with his estranged father, who had been largely absent during his childhood. The meeting is emotional, with Chris expressing both anger and longing. "I didn't have you growing up," Chris says, "but I'm determined to be there for my son, no matter what." His father, visibly moved, responds, "You're doing better than I ever did, Chris. I'm proud of you." While the reunion doesn't resolve all of their issues, it gives Chris a sense of closure and reinforces his commitment to being the best father he can be. As the chapter draws to a close, Chris's efforts at work continue to bear fruit. He secures several more clients, and his performance metrics place him among the top contenders in the internship program. Despite the progress, Chris knows he can't let his guard down. The competition is fierce, and every day is a battle to stay ahead. One evening, as he and Christopher sit together in the shelter, Chris reflects on how far they've come. He pulls out a piece of paper and writes down his goals, keeping them in his pocket as a constant reminder of what he's working towards. "Just a little longer," he whispers to himself. "We're almost there." Chris Gardner's journey reaches a pivotal point in this chapter, where the fruits of his relentless determination, unwavering hope, and boundless love for his son finally begin to manifest. This is the culmination of months of hardship, sacrifice, and grit as Chris steps closer to his dream. As the internship nears its conclusion, the pressure on Chris intensifies. Every intern knows that only one of them will be offered a full-time position, and the competition becomes fiercer than ever. Chris continues to work tirelessly, making every second count. His cold calls are sharper, his meetings more persuasive, and his ability to build client trust increasingly evident. Despite his growing confidence, Chris feels the weight of his circumstances pressing harder. The thought of failure terrifies him, not because of what it means for him, but because of what it would mean for Christopher Jr. One evening, Chris overhears two interns discussing their backup plans in case they don't get the job. It's a luxury Chris can't afford. For him, failure isn't an option, it's a matter of survival. Chris secures a meeting with one of the most influential and high-profile potential clients at Dean Witter. This client, Mr. Rankin, represents a massive opportunity, not only for Chris's numbers but also for his credibility. On the morning of the meeting, Chris ensures every detail is perfect. He arrives early, wearing his best, albeit worn, suit and greets Mr. Rankin with a firm handshake and a warm smile. Throughout the meeting, Chris showcases his knowledge, preparation, and genuine desire to provide value. At one point, Mr. Rankin asks him a challenging question about long-term investment strategies. Chris pauses, takes a deep breath, and responds with clarity and confidence, drawing on his extensive self-study and hands-on learning during the internship. I believe that true success in investments comes from a partnership based on trust and long-term vision. If you give me the opportunity, I'll make sure your interests are protected and prioritized every step of the way, Chris says. Impressed by Chris's authenticity and professionalism, Mr. Rankin decides to open an account. This moment becomes a turning point in Chris's career, solidifying his position as a top contender for the full-time role. The day of the final announcement arrives. All the interns are gathered in a conference room, the air thick with anticipation. Chris sits quietly, his heart pounding in his chest. He reflects on everything he's endured to get to this moment. The nights spent in shelters, the countless rejections, and the unwavering belief that he could change his and his son's lives. The hiring manager steps forward and begins to speak. We want to thank all of you for your hard work and dedication over these past months. It hasn't been an easy decision, but we've made our choice. Chris holds his breath as the manager continues. The candidate we've chosen has demonstrated exceptional performance, resilience, and the ability to connect with clients. That person is Chris Gardner. For a moment, Chris is stunned. The room seems to blur as the weight of the announcement sinks in. When reality hits, he feels an overwhelming surge of relief, joy, and gratitude. The other interns congratulate him, some with genuine warmth, others with reluctant acknowledgement. Chris shakes hands with the hiring manager, fighting back tears as he thanks him for the opportunity. That evening, Chris picks up Christopher from daycare, his heart full of excitement. As they walk hand in hand, Chris kneels down and looks his son in the eye. "Christopher," he says, his voice trembling with emotion, "we did it. We got the job." Christopher beams with joy, though he doesn't fully understand the magnitude of the news. "Does that mean we're going to have a house?" he asks. Chris smiles, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, buddy. It means we're going to have a house. And so much more." They embrace tightly, both father and son sharing a moment of pure happiness. With the full-time position secured, Chris's life begins to change. He receives his first paycheck and immediately starts planning their next steps. The first thing he does is find a modest apartment for him and Christopher. When they move in, Christopher runs through the rooms, laughing with excitement. "We have our own place," he exclaims. For Chris, the apartment represents more than just a home. It's a symbol of everything he's fought for and the life he's determined to build for his son. As the chapter comes to a close, Chris reflects on the journey that brought him to this point. He thinks about the nights spent sleeping on restroom floors, the rejections he faced, and the moments when giving up seemed like the easier option. But through it all, Chris never wavered in his belief that he could create a better life for his son. He realizes that the true measure of success isn't just about material wealth. It's about perseverance, love, and the willingness to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the road may be. Though Chris's story is far from over, this chapter marks the beginning of a new era. With a stable job, a home, and the love of his son, Chris is finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. As he tucks Christopher into bed that night, he whispers, "We made it, buddy, and this is just the start." Christopher smiles sleepily, and Chris sits by his side, feeling a profound sense of gratitude and hope for the future. Chris Gardner's journey is a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and hope. The road from homelessness to financial security was anything but easy. Every step was fraught with challenges, each day a battle against insurmountable odds. Yet, through his unwavering determination and the deep bond he shared with his son, Chris not only transformed his own life, but also inspired millions around the world. After securing the full-time position at Dean Witter Reynolds, Chris didn't stop striving. His work ethic, integrity, and ability to connect with clients propelled him to great success in the financial sector. Within a few years, Chris started his own brokerage firm, Gardner Rich & Company, a move that solidified his place in the world of finance. But for Chris, success was never just about wealth. It was about creating a better life for his son and proving to himself that no obstacle was too great to overcome. Throughout his journey, Chris remained deeply committed to being a present and loving father to Christopher Jr. He knew firsthand the pain of growing up without a strong parental figure, and he vowed to give his son the love and support he had longed for as a child. As Christopher grew, he carried with him the lessons learned from his father's struggle. He saw firsthand the value of resilience, hard work, and an unshakable belief in one's dreams. These lessons shaped him into a compassionate and driven individual, proud of the legacy his father had built. Years later, Chris decided to share his story with the world. His memoir, The Pursuit of Happiness, became a bestseller, touching the hearts of readers everywhere. It served as a beacon of hope for those facing their own struggles, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found. The story was later adapted into a feature film, with Chris's journey brought to life on the big screen. Audiences around the globe were moved by the tale of a father's relentless pursuit of a better life for his son, and Chris's story became a cultural phenomenon. Chris Gardner's journey didn't end with his personal success. He dedicated much of his life to giving back, becoming a motivational speaker and philanthropist. He worked to support initiatives aimed at ending homelessness, providing opportunities for underserved communities, and inspiring individuals to chase their dreams. Through his efforts, Chris became a symbol of hope, a living example of what is possible when you refuse to give up. Chris often reflected on the concept of happiness, a theme that had defined his life's journey. He came to understand that happiness isn't something handed to you. It's something you pursue with all your heart. It's found in the moments of struggle, the small victories, and the love shared with those who matter most. For Chris, happiness was never about material wealth or accolades. It was about knowing he had done everything in his power to provide a better future for his son, and in doing so, proving to himself that he was capable of greatness. Today, Chris Gardner's story continues to inspire. His life stands as a powerful reminder that no matter where you start, you have the ability to rewrite your story. It's a message of hope for anyone who has ever felt defeated, a call to action for those who dare to dream. As Chris once said, the secret to success is to be willing to start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And with those words, Chris Gardner's journey, a journey of resilience, love, and the relentless pursuit of happiness, lives on. Hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel. Your participation is essential so that we can continue to bring you more incredible stories. Share it with your friends to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.